What's going on, everybody? We are starting the day off pretty red. The stock market in general is relatively red. The Bitcoin miners in general right now are red, starting to turn green. Bitcoin came down and tested this $56,000 level overnight, and this was a level that provided a big reaction. Luckily, we bounced on it. Last time we broke it, we saw a huge reaction to the downside. And then when we broke it to the upside, we also saw a pretty big reaction as well. And on the bounce of it, we are seeing a pretty big positive reaction here too. But Bitcoin is slowly recovering. It's down about 1%. This drop down to 56,000 is quickly recovering, which is nice. One thing I'm watching right now is this ascending line. The market is definitely reacting to it. It was a resistance before we finally flipped it along with that 56K. And you'll see that the market tried to ride it up, and once it broke it, we did see a reaction and it became resistance again. I do want to see us break this ascending line. And something else I'm watching is a little bit of a bigger pattern. This is a descending channel that we've been in. There have been these false breakouts before, but the market doesn't stay above the pattern long enough and it pretty much gets taken back in. I do think 58,000 is a pretty important zone. You'll see this is a major line that we have bounced off of before. You'll see it has been a bouncing off point multiple times. There has been breaks, but then it quickly has recovered. There has been points that we get big reactions on a break of it. Big reaction on a break of it. Resistance, resistance. 58K will be crucial to break. Now, this is basically what we are looking at zoomed in on the hourly. Now, looking at the daily, we still have this inverse head and shoulders potentially playing out. You'll see the head here, the shoulder here, and our next shoulder here. We are maintaining this 54,000 so far. But you can see this descending channel I'm talking about. You can see that we have not broken out of it. On shorter term time frames, we occasionally do, but then it falls back in. I want to see a break on the daily, a candle close out of this on the daily. I do personally think that this inverse head and shoulders will play out. We will have a breakout. Once we break that 58K, our next stop is testing the 50 MA at about $60,000 and then working on our golden cross, going on to test all-time highs. And I do think that time is coming. It is right around the corner, in my opinion. I do think before the end of this year, we are going to, at the very least, test all-time highs. Now, one thing we received today that the market is reacting to is CPI. We also have PPI coming out tomorrow. We'll talk about that. But this has changed the Fed's likelihood of certain rate cuts. We'll get there in a second. Basically, Bitcoin pulled back 3% or so on this CPI print. Once the news released, Bitcoin did fell down to that 56K. It does look like it's recovering pretty nicely. I wouldn't be surprised to see the day end green for Bitcoin, in green for some of the Bitcoin miners. We have had a good start to the week so far, but look at this. This is the lowest year-on-year CPI since February of 2021. I think it's actually March of 2021. I'll show you guys. And this has really changed the probabilities for a 50 basis point cut versus a 25 basis point cut. You'll notice how much this has changed over the last few days. They were pretty neck and neck about a week, 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, it was like 25-75. Now it's an 85% probability that we're going to get a 25 basis point cut or a 0.25% cut. And now it's a 15% chance of getting a 50 basis point cut. We do still have PPI coming out before the Fed meeting, but it is very likely it's going to be a 25 basis point cut regardless of PPI. I do think the market is reacting slightly negatively to the higher likelihood of a lower cut. But I think there's a knee-jerk reaction, and the market does this at times on big events like this. The Fed meeting, for instance, we get a sell-off on the Fed meeting. No matter what is said, really, we have usually seen a sell-off at the Fed meeting, a couple days of red, and then Bitcoin goes on to rally afterwards. I believe that didn't happen on the last meeting, but ones before last, we basically saw that every time. So my point is just don't let this one day fool you, regardless if it's green or red. I want to see how the rest of this week goes. Days like these can definitely trick us. And I wanted to show you guys CPI on this chart, and I believe it was actually March that was the lower read rather than February. It doesn't really matter, but in March 10/03/2021, the third month of 2021, we had a 1.7% for CPI, and then in April we had a 2.6. The forecast was a 2.5. February was a 1.4%. So maybe I'm tripping here, maybe I'm wrong or something, or maybe they're wrong. But either way, though, this is the lowest CPI for quite a long time. You can see on this chart, we haven't been down here in a very, very long time, since 2021, early 2021, whether it's February or March. And I do want to bring up, we have PPI releasing tomorrow. The forecast is a 1.8%. It's already well under the Fed's target. This isn't their main gauge of inflation. This isn't really what they're watching as closely. But if we get this 1.8% that's expected, this will be a positive. I think the market's basically completely expecting 25 basis point regardless of the probabilities of a 50. we're getting a 25 basis point cut in my opinion. Regardless of if this is a 1.8, a 1.6, or a 2.0, I don't think this will change much. But we will have, of course, an initial reaction on this data. If we see it come down really hard, that might bring some concerns. But PPI is another thing to watch for. I believe this is the last data we'll get before the Fed meeting coming up next week. And we have some positive news from yesterday. Spot Bitcoin ETFs post another positive inflow. US spot Bitcoin ETFs see 117 million in inflows, and Ethereum registered an 11 million inflow. Fidelity led the surge with a 63 million in inflows. And the total net inflows for Fidelity is nearly $10 billion now. It's a 9.5 billion in their first 8 months of trading. This is how long the spot Bitcoin ETFs have been live. Fidelity, which isn't even the largest, has already nearly taken in $10 billion in total net inflows. And they are the third largest behind GBTC and IBIT. And as for their holdings, they actually hold $10.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. And this is a nice change because recently we saw about $1 billion exit these spot Bitcoin ETFs throughout August and into September. And I brought this up to you guys the other day, but this is definitely worth mentioning again. Of the 400 new ETFs launched in 2024, the top 4 of those are all spot Bitcoin ETFs. And the iShares Ethereum Trust became the 7th largest ETF launched in 2024, surpassing $1 billion in inflows. And coming back to the heat map, this is TradingView's heat map, by the way. A lot of people have been asking about this. And the one that shows the Bitcoin miners doesn't show all of them, but it's the best that I found. That is WGMI heat map, which is basically the WGMI ETF from Valkyrie. It's a Bitcoin mining ETF. It also holds Nvidia and some semiconductor stocks, but it's nice to look at, give you a general idea of how some of the Bitcoin miners are doing. I do think that we will end this day green. Things are starting to flip green. Hopefully we continue to see a little recovery today, because in reality CPI came in relatively good. I mean, it is basically right in line with expectations. It didn't come in surprisingly high or alarmingly low, and this is laying out the red carpet for the Fed to start these rate cuts. We are almost in the 2% range. PPI is going to come in probably under 2%, and we do have PCE coming up later in the month, I believe. We will see what that gives us. I think that's after the Fed meeting, but we'll see how the rest of the day goes. I do think September on a crypto level will surprise us. Typically September is a bad month during a halving year. Typically September is actually a good month. I do believe, and I'll say it and I'll say it again, I do believe when we look back into August and September, if we don't buy, we will regret it. We will look back at these days and say, dang, I wish I bought some Bitcoin while it was in the 50,000s, while it briefly dipped down to 49,000. We'll see how this ages in 3 to 6 months. But thanks as always for watching, guys. Let me know what Bitcoin miners you're buying down below. To me, this is the time to be loading up on the Bitcoin miners you like, that you have conviction in. When we get rolling into 2025, I do expect a lot of these Bitcoin miners to be posting consistent profitability quarter over quarter. And that, in my opinion, is when the hype really draws back in for these Bitcoin miners and we see new levels we haven't seen yet this cycle. But let me know how you guys are feeling recently in this market. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.